So ultimately, this is the biggest mistake and therefore the easiest way to improve your notes.
Hey everyone, my name is James, and in this video I hope to answer the question, how can you make your meeting minutes even better? I think the biggest piece of advice that I'll talk about later is quite simple but also quite easy not to do. I'm also going to take you through an example action log, which is the thing that my company used to take meeting minutes, and I'll take you through a few really good examples and a few not so good examples. So let's get into it. So my last video that I made about taking good meeting minutes seemed to be quite helpful for people. And over the last year and a half, I've learned a heck of a lot more about how to make good and in particularly bad meeting notes, which I hope to share with you some of my advice here. So I wanted to make this video quite a lot more practical than the last video. I'll give you a few sort of general bits of advice, but I'm aiming just to show you an action log that I have done for an actual project that I'm on. Obviously, I will have removed any sort of client names, any real suppliers involved, any people involved, just to make it completely okay for me to share. But I'm hoping that this will be a real way of actually helping you make it better notes, as it's one that I've actually done myself. Before we look at it, let me just give you some general tips about taking good notes in the next 60 seconds. General rule number 1, always try and review the meeting minutes from the previous meeting before you go into the next meeting. The worst thing is when you're looking at your minutes, or even worse if you're sharing them on the screen of the actions that needed to be done, and you're looking at them for the first time in that meeting with the client and you can't remember what any of them mean. Always try and review them before the meeting and see which ones have obviously been completed and if you've got any updates that you can provide in the meeting. General rule number 2, and this is quite simple and many of you might already do this, but I know I certainly didn't for quite a while, and it's make your notes, or I should say take your notes in the format that you're actually going to be sending them out in. For so long I would jot down loads of random thoughts on OneNote and just sort of chuck as much information as I could on the screen whilst the meeting happened. And then at the end of that meeting, I'd have to condense all of that into a nice action log, which I'm about to show you. And this process took me ages. It took hours. And if I had a meeting right at the end of the day, I'd end up spending, an extra hour past my sort of working hours in order to get it out that evening. When you take notes in the format that you're actually going to send them out in, I think it makes you think a lot harder about what am I actually trying to say here. And making really clear notes is an absolute must. There are some other sort of good tips that I have, but I'll break them all down once we get into this action log.
So here we are. We use Excel and we'll always put the meeting type. So this one was from a design team that I did, and also the date that the meeting was held at the top. So just general housekeeping before I get into the detail. We'll have an ID column, makes it easier to identify the action rather than to describe it every time. The date the action was created, a general sort of description of what was the issue talked about. Category, try and keep these as simple as possible. I think we only have 5 or 6 different categories, and obviously that will change depending on what industry you're in. We have a next steps column, which is the next action that's required. Next is a column that is to do with the importance or the priority of the action. How important is it to get done? A deadline, this is really helpful for defining the time frame of how much time we have to do an action. And then the final 2 are the issue lead. So the issue lead is who is responsible for getting that action done, and then the status is open or closed. Are the only 2 options for us here. This is just so that we can effectively filter through all the actions. If it's an open action, we want to be able to see it. If it's closed, then we just hide it. So that's why on the left you can see a bunch of hidden columns. There's quite a few actions. So the biggest mistake that people make is this column right here, the next steps column. This is effectively the action that needs to be done. Too often something very vague will be put down that's often not an action, and it becomes unclear actually what needs to be done. If an action is unclear, then it will not get done. This is a big thing I've learned recently, is it's really important to be really clear what the actual action is from the issue raised. I know how easy it is when you're in a meeting and you're probably not an expert in the area being discussed, how hard it can be to distinguish what the action actually is. And this is where it's really important to clarify. So Simon Sinek has a really good story about being the idiot in the room. And I'll play the clip for you now just so you understand where I'm coming from.
The reality is, I'm an idiot. And I'm not being flip about it. I don't understand very complicated things. And so I ask a lot of questions so that the person who's telling me something complicated, who's talking in terms as if I understand them,
Sure.
finance or neuroscience, I don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
And I ask enough questions just so that I understand it. So is what you're saying this? No, that's not what I'm saying. Well, what are you? So I'll give you a perfect example. So a long time ago, I had a client, they invited me to sit in on a meeting from the consultant that they had hired. And so all the C-level executives and me, and this consultant was giving a presentation about something or other.
And this is junior marketing.
This is when I had my little marketing company, and all the C-level executives sitting there nodding and taking notes on the PowerPoint that they had printed up in front of them, and I had it as well, and I didn't understand a frickin' word of it.
Yeah.
Right. I was like looking around, like,
yeah.
And so I'd raise my hand and say, I'm really, really sorry. I know I'm the only person in this room without an MBA, but this doesn't make sense. Like, you say A plus B equals C, but based on your logic, A plus B equals D. Can you just say it again, please? I'm really sorry to slow the meeting down, everybody. And you could see the consultant getting frustrated with me and would try and explain it again. I said, I'm so sorry. And one by one, all the C-level executives said, yeah, I don't understand it either. Now, if the idiot hadn't spoken up and said, I don't understand, they all would have nodded their heads for fear of looking stupid because they didn't understand. And they would have paid a lot of money for a document they didn't understand, and they would never have used it and would have sat on a shelf. And it's because I'm okay being the idiot. Like, that's why I'm not being flip. I'm okay everybody in the room going, oh, because I have to ask questions until I understand it. But the reality is there's I can get to the point where I understand it, I can get it so simple that I understand it, and I can say it in simple terms. That means other people understand it too. So there's a lot of value being the idiot.
Well, I hope your take from this is it's okay to be the idiot in the room. Most people in that meeting will be quite grateful that you clarified. If the note taker hasn't got a clear understanding of what the action is, then chances are no one else will either, especially because you're the one who's going to be writing it down and they'll be reading it later on and probably won't know what you're talking about. So always clarify. So ultimately, this is the biggest mistake and therefore the easiest way to improve your notes. You might be wondering what you use the description box for if that's not for where the action needs to go. So for example, refrigeration designer and contractor, I might have been a bit clearer about what it was relating to, so I might have put refrigeration designer contractor selection. And the next step for this could be, James to reach out to X to set up introductory meeting. In this scenario, we put someone to set up a meeting with X and Y, and then we just stated that the meeting was held. So in most of our action logs, we don't have rows that are highlighted this color. This is just to show you what I think is maybe not a great example of a next step in particular. So with this one, it's to do with design regulations in a different country. So we're designing a building, a factory in a different country. What are the sort of laws maybe that might affect the construction? So this is quite vague. I'd say it's not really specific enough in terms of what the actual action is, and what they actually need to do. Are they going to talk to a specific person? Do we need to set up a meeting? Do we need to just do a bit of Googling? It's a little bit vague for an action log, I would say. So additionally, action logs are used to capture statements, and I and our company tend to categorize it as a statement within the priority column. Don't ask me why, but I think it just makes sense. And with statements, we only ever write in the description box. So statements can be really quite important to note down. For example, if someone clarifies a really important piece of information, for example, the production line needs to run at 120 packs a minute. So we would put our statement into this column here. So in this scenario, it said Y, I'm not sure, I can't remember who this was, but Y will be taking lead on the client side from racking warehouse design. This is just so we know kind of that has been stated, that we now are aware that this person is in charge of this, so that we don't forget. And for statements, I would generally leave all the other columns blank, as there's no real next steps involved with it. So I would just have it as a statement. You can probably fill in the category. In this case, I didn't. Another thing that's really, really helpful tip actually is if you're doing an action log like this, where there are previous meeting sort of notes in there, always try and embolden the new sort of information, so it's really quick and easy to see what is new and what is old. So even if you're updating an old action, you can see I've emboldened a few of these, and that just means that you can see exactly what is new, and the people that are going to be reading it don't have to faff around reading through everything to figure out what's new. Other good practices is once an action is actually complete, we then put in the priority column that it's complete, but we still make sure to send it out once it's initially been completed. We send it out and make sure the client has seen that it is completed before we then close it. And this is just so that they know, we're getting stuff done. Rather than completing it and then closing it off immediately, it's good to make sure that they've seen that. Now, two really important columns are these two, the deadline and issue lead. You need to know what the time frame is for your action. Has the client asked us to get something prepared before the next meeting? So does it need to be done, a few days before, or actually is it a little bit less time important and we can put it into the week after, so we're not worrying about it as much? Deadlines can be important because we tend to filter the deadline based on what needs to be done by the next meeting. So if there's something that's 2 weeks in advance, time, we kind of won't worry about it as much for that meeting. If you get the deadline wrong though, and actually it needs to be done sooner, but it's been put further away, we often actually miss it because it's in that further away column. So you've got to be careful with, when you're putting your deadlines. As I alluded to when I took you through the general structures, that the issue lead column is really, really, really important. Some good advice with this is, and I only learned this a few months ago, never put more than one person down as an issue lead. This is what we've been suggested, because if 2 people are down on the issue lead, then naturally the other person will think that the other one's going to be doing it, and the other one's going to think the other one's going to be doing it, and it doesn't get done. If 2 people are needing to do stuff, create separate line items and just have one person down in the issue lead. I think that's been a really helpful piece of advice that I've gained. Equally, and this might not be necessarily the case for all organizations, but certainly for us, we found it helpful that for an issue lead, it doesn't necessarily have to be the person put down does the actual action, but ultimately they're responsible for getting it done. So I might give it to XX as in this case, but XX could talk to YY and say, oh, do you mind getting this done for me? I haven't got enough time. But it's ultimately XX's responsibility to make sure that someone gets it done or they get it done themselves. Too often I've allocated actions to the wrong people and they've not got done. So I've certainly learned a bit about that. And I just highlighted another green one here, which is not normally highlighted green in a normal action log. It's just because I want to show you what a good one looks like. So in this case, I've said that there are spiral freezer options, an alternative to YX. So we might have a spiral freezer supplier, but we want to find another alternative just to get a comparative quote. And in this case, someone is going to set up a call with Y to introduce the product. It's very clear what needs to be done. There's no sort of guesswork involved. It's right, X is going to set up a call with Y and we're going to introduce the project. It's very clear, and there is a clear deadline of when it needs to be done. And then also it's clear that who's going to do it. XX in this case. XX is a busy person. So ultimately that's a little bit of a summary of what my action log looks like. You have to bear in mind that I've been doing this for a few years, so I'm better than I was, but equally I'm not perfect. So if anyone sees anything in this where they're like, actually I think that seems like a really bad way of doing it, if there is a better way, please let me know. But this tends to work quite well, so hopefully that'll be helpful for you.
Hey everyone, so I've just literally finished a meeting where I've been doing the action log, and I'm about to send out the action log and the PowerPoint sort of presentation that we took the client through. And I was just remembering that some people don't often send out their action logs in Excel format. They'll send them out in PDF so that no one can change it. But we quite often like to send it out in Excel so you can filter what your actions are. So the people that are being sent the action log can filter it so they see what they need to do. My question really is, what do you think? Do you think that when you send out your meeting minutes to people, you should send them out in PDF form so no one can alter them? Or do you think you should send them out in Excel so that people can sort of filter it based on what they need to do? I don't really know what the answer is. I suppose it depends on the scenario of the project. But yeah, let me know what you think. If you're an inexperienced note taker like me, it's definitely worth reviewing your notes with a senior manager, as this will really help you to figure out if there's anything you missed, but more importantly, if you've not defined things clearly enough, particularly what the next steps are. I found this super, super helpful, and it's pretty much where I'm getting all of this useful information from. And finally, make sure you spell check. To be honest, I didn't do this for far too long, and embarrassingly, it's probably because I didn't realize that Excel had a spell check, which obviously it does. Anyway, make sure you spell check, because it's just a really simple, good practice to make sure your notes are as best as they can be. If you found this video helpful, then you might like to check out one of these 2 videos, also around taking notes. And if you also have any questions, please put them in the comments and I'll try and answer them, or someone who's more experienced than me will probably answer it anyway. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next video.